Chapter 8, the nervous system. The major divisions of the nervous system are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The central nervous system is abbreviated CNS. The function of the central nervous system is to integrate the incoming information received and coordinate all voluntary and involuntary nervous functions. The peripheral nervous system, abbreviated by the PNS, consists of all the ganglia and the nerves that branch from the central nervous system. And ganglia are just large clusters of nerve cells located outside the central nervous system. The function of the peripheral nervous system is to keep the central nervous system in contact with the rest of our body. Subdivisions of the peripheral nervous system are based on function. The somatic nervous system receives sensory information and directs our voluntary movements, whereas the autonomic nervous system regulates our involuntary activities such as digestion, circulation. Two divisions of the autonomic nervous system include the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is in charge of during emergencies or stressful situations known as the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic nervous system adjusts our bodily functions during restful times, often referred to as rest and digest. And so this image shows how all information is ultimately going to go to the central nervous system to be interpreted and integrated. It'll control our motor output to the somatic nervous system, directing voluntary movements, also to the autonomic nervous system, which regulates involuntary activities such as the heart rate, breathing rate. Autonomic is going to regulate the parasympathetic. It's going to govern bodily actions during restful conditions. Also during the sympathetic, it'll prepare the body for stressful or emergency situations such as directing energy to the heart, to the lungs, diverting energy resources away from stomach during stressful situations. Protection of the central nervous system is that the bones of the skull and the vertebral column. Three connective tissue membranes form the meninges. The dura mater is the outermost layer. It's kind of tough and leathery. The arachnoid is the middle layer, and the pia mater is the innermost matter and attached to the brain and adheres to every irregularity on the brain surface. You have the cerebral spinal fluid and the blood-brain barrier as well. Meningitis is an inflammation of the meninges. It's caused by either bacterial or viruses, and it can lead to encephalitis, which is just inflammation of the brain. Vaccines are available for most forms of meningitis, and colleges now require these vaccinations. Infection, as we said, can lead to encephalitis. Antibiotics are used for these bacterial infections. Medicine can be used to alleviate the pain and fever while the body's immune system fights the infection. There is an increased risk in closed quarters such as dormitories. Individuals may carry that bacteria in their throat without showing symptoms. Can be spread through coughing, sneezing, kissing. Upperclassmen typically have a reduced risk due to a built resistance. The cerebral spinal fluid is located between the meninges, spaces between the meninges. In the ventricles, the internal cavities of the brain, and the central cavity is the cavity within the spinal cord. The cerebral spinal fluid functions is one, that it acts as a shock absorption. It cushions the brain from impact to the skull, from impact to the skull. Number two, it acts to support. Because the brain floats in the cerebral spinal fluid, it is not crushed under its own weight. And function three is nourishment and waste removal. The cerebral spinal fluid serves as the medium to deliver nutrients and chemical message, as well as to remove the waste products from this area. And so this shows the breakdown of where you would find the cerebral spinal fluid, then the bones of the skull, the ventricles, and the meninges. The blood-brain barrier. Its structure is formed by tight junctions between cells in the walls of the capillaries supplying the central nervous system. These capillary cells filter lipid solubles such as oxygen and carbon dioxide as they pass. Also, drugs like alcohol and caffeine are also lipid soluble, so this explains why we have effect. The function of the blood-brain barrier is to protect the central nervous system by selecting substances that can enter the cerebral spinal fluid from the blood. The blood-brain barrier inhibits many potential life-saving, infection-fighting, or tumor-suppressing drugs that are not lipid-soluble from reaching the brain. The cerebrum is the thinking, the conscious part of the brain that accounts for 83% of the total brain weight. The cerebrum is the largest and the most prominent part of the brain. It's separated into two hemispheres by the longitudinal fissure. The longitudinal fissure is a deep groove running between the left and the right cerebral hemispheres. Each hemisphere receives sensory information from and directs movements of the opposite side of the body. So the left controls the right and the right controls the left. The cerebrum also contains sensory areas for touch, vision, hearing, and olfaction. The cerebrum also contains the association areas for interpreting our sensations. It contains the area for language, for thinking, for decision making, accounting for our creativity, and for storing our memories. Contains the motor areas for voluntary control of movement. So, pardon me, this shows the cerebrum, the regions of the brain, that corpus callosum, which is going to allow these nerves to pass from side to side. That longitudinal fissure will actually separate those, and then we will talk further about these other brain structures. The cerebral cortex is an outer layer of gray matter which includes neuroglial cells, nerve cell bodies, and unmyelinated axons. And remember, those have lower conductivity rate. The white matter, on the other hand, is the layer beneath the cerebral cortex that consists of mostly myelinated axons. So it allows for the communication between the various areas of the brain and between the brain and the spinal cord. And that corpus callosum is a band of white matter that connects those two cerebral hemispheres. The longitudinal fissure separates it, and the corpus callosum actually connects these two cerebral hemispheres, the left and the right. The grooves on the surface of the brain mark the boundaries of 4 different lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. And this shows the various lobes that we will be discussing further. The cerebral cortex contains sensory, motor, and association areas. Sensory areas: the primary somatosensatory area forms a band in the parietal lobe that extends over the cortex from ear to ear. This area receives information from receptors in the skin, joints, and skeleton muscles. So from our parietal receptors that gives us our those are the receptors that never adjust, that always allow us, our body, to know where it is. The motor areas contains the primary motor area that controls the skeleton muscles. The premotor cortex coordinates learned motor skills, and also responsible for performing simple repeating muscle activities such as typing, playing a musical instrument. Various body sensory receptors and information are sent to the cerebral cortex, where each sense is processed in a different region. Primary somatosensory areas detect touch, pain, temperature. The greater the degree of sensitivity, the greater area of the cortex is devoted to that. Most sensitive are tongue, hands, face, and typically to the genitals. And so this just shows where each area will have a segregated area that's going to be responsible for controlling and monitoring. The association areas communicate with the sensory and motor areas and with other parts of the brain to analyze and act on our sensory input. Prefrontal cortex enables us to reason. It enables us to plan for the long term and to think in the abstract. And the prefrontal cortex plays a key role in determining our personality. This is often the region that you look at when they're looking at different brain activity if there's been damage. Our prefrontal cortex helps predict consequences of various responses to information received and decides on the best response. The thalamus serves as the relay station for the brain for all sensory information except smell. The thalamus also directs motor activity, stimulation of the cerebral cortex, and memory. It sorts this information and passes it to the appropriate region of the cortex for processing. The hypothalamus is a small region that lies below the thalamus. It maintains homeostasis by regulating blood pressure, heart rate, breathing rate, digestion, and body temperature. The hypothalamus coordinates the nervous and endocrine systems by influencing the pituitary gland. And we'll study more about this in Chapter 10. It's going to control the hormones that it releases. But it's a major player in the body's homeostasis, regulating blood pressure and heart rate, breathing rate, digestion, body temperature. It's a major switch in the body. The cerebellum integrates information from the motor cortex and sensory pathways to produce smooth and well-timed voluntary movements. It acts for a comparison, comparing actual position of a body part to where it ought to be, and as well as predicting, calculates future positions of a body part during a movement. Helps to control equilibrium and posture. Such as muscle tension, input from eyes and ears, the position of our joints, that parietal receptors. The brainstem includes the medulla oblongata, the midbrain, and the pons. The medulla oblongata contains reflex centers to regulate the rhythm of breathing, the force and the rate of the heartbeat, and blood pressure. The medulla oblongata serves as a pathway for all sensory messages going to the higher brain centers and all motor messages leaving the brain. So the medulla relays information to the thalamus. It rests at the base of the brain, so information going to the brain or going from the brain. The medulla connects the spinal cord to the brain. So the sensory information to the brain travels through there, and the motor messages leaving the brain travel through the medulla oblongata. The midbrain is a region that processes information about sights and sounds. It controls simple reflex responses to these stimuli, such as turning your head toward a loud sound. The pons, simply meaning a bridge, connects the spinal cord and cerebellum with the cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus, and has a region within that assists the medulla in also regulating respiration.